All right, welcome back. We are COMP125 in the summer 2020 semester, and it's week 12, part 1 of our broadcast. We're going to be talking about building reusable components with CreateJS and TypeScript, which is one of my favorite subjects. However, let's talk about a couple things from an organizational perspective as we begin. So this week, we're sitting at week 12, and next week is the last week of class. So many of you probably have questions like, so what's happening for our final test? What is our plan and all that kind of stuff. So here's the plan. My plan is to release the final test details on Monday. That's my plan, right? And what you'll do is it'll be a small mini assignment that you'll have to put together. That'll be due Friday, right? So you have Monday to Friday to get it done. It'll be geared for approximately 2 hours of work. All right, so it's not going to be something that's going to take you an inordinate length of time. Think about it as a midterm test, but instead of doing true, false, multiple choice, it'll be practical. That's what will happen. And then you will have a chance to complete it anytime between Monday and Friday. That's the thing that I'm going to be doing with you guys. So what does this mean? What it means is that Friday is the absolute deadline for all final work, right? So that means you have to get it in your final test by Friday because it's like an exam. So if you don't get it in by Friday, then you get 0, right? But the great thing is you'll have all week to get it done. Also, because this Wednesday is our last teaching day, right, as an example, or lecture, Monday and Wednesday of next week I will reserve to meet with everybody, right, in terms of one-on-one feedback with you guys. Any kind of questions you have about your assignment, your final assignment, any problems you have with your test, and I'll go over the test with you on Monday, of course. I'll go through the details with you and all that stuff. But I'll be there to assist you. That's all I'm going to be doing next week. So there's no formal lecture. So attendance will not be required. You don't have to come out. However, I will be here personally. I'll be here, and I'll be here to support you. That's what my role will be for next week. And this way, you'll have a chance to, do your work, and I can help you. And then I'm not going to give you additional load or more things that you have to watch, because really, at the end of the day, after this week, your course, the material that I have to deliver is done, and I think we've covered more than what would be required from, the curriculum. I think you've got most of it. So when you get into the next semester, I think you'll have a good foundation from what you're doing. So that's how I'm feeling about it from the stuff that we've covered. So what this means is that, like earlier on Monday, I'll try and get it out as early as I can on Monday. You'll have a chance to start looking at your material. I recommend you get the stuff done as soon as possible. So as soon as you get a chance to open up your test, get it done. Sit through, do a 2-hour thing. There'll be a short video involved as well. I know I've had some comments about the videos. They're like, Tom hasn't marked our stuff, but he's asking for videos. I'm not asking for videos because I need it for anything else other than from an academic integrity perspective. So please bear with me. I know this has been a weird semester, especially for all of us. I would say it's not just like not limited to you or to me. It's all of us together. Bear with me. I'll do my best to give you good feedback. And like I said, I'm going to be very fair in terms of how I mark you and give you good feedback. So next week when we get together, I'll go through all the things with you so that you have enough information to feel comfortable about what you've learned, and also take away some stuff for next semester. Okay. So any questions around just in general? And again, you don't know the details of the test yet, but I'm going to try and make it fairly straightforward. I'm probably going to give you a starter. Like, you're not going to start off with 0. I'm going to give you something to start with. If there's any assets that you need, I'll try and include everything so that you'll have assets that are included in the test, so that there won't be things to download or whatever. And now the challenge is, whenever you see someone else's material, code and so on, and trying to fill in the blanks from someone else's code, I think it can be very challenging. So again, do your best to take a good read through the code that's there already, and understand what is being asked of you, and fully ask me questions. My job is to make sure that I clarify any kind of doubts you might have or questions that you have around the material that I'm asking you to kind of put together. Okay, so that's what's going to happen next week. So Monday and Wednesday, no formal lecture next week. I'm going to send out Zoom meeting kind of information, but it's only for meeting with me and answering questions, technical issues. I won't be broadcasting a lecture next week at all, so there's not going to be a follow-up or review, and I'm not going to be talking about the final test online, and there's a couple of reasons for that, because I want to kind of cover stuff with you. Whoever's here with me, I'll talk about it, but it should be fairly straightforward, and again, it'll be starting on Monday. Okay, think about it as a test week as opposed to a test day. All right, so before we move on, any questions at all about the format of the test? It'll be practical, or anything else that I've talked about today. If you have a question, please put up your hand, so that, because I know that it comes up faster if you put up your hand than if you try and type, and I won't know to pause, and I'm going to move on, and then you might have questions. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions right now. However, I'll try and reserve some time near the end of today to answer any questions as we go. I'm going to try not to run as close to the end as possible. It's going to be tough because there's a lot of stuff to cover today, but we'll try. I'll try my best. Okay, let's see how it goes. All right, so last week what we talked about was near the end, like that was on Wednesday, we talked about CreateJS and how it can give us the ability to work with the HTML5 canvas element. I'm going to start off with talking about CreateJS again today and TypeScript. So again, this is where you get this enhancement, this enrichment part that you can use for next semester, this part right here. Okay, so I'm going to go into the folder we worked with last day. So we worked with lesson 11. I'm just going to copy and paste this one. So copy and paste. And so we're going to make lesson 12 out of it. I'm going to put this up on GitHub right away so you have it. Okay, so let's open up VS Code here. I'm just going to drag and drop lesson 12 inside there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename some stuff. So tsconfig.json, just to review, is you need to have this in place in order for you to have a target for you to transpile from TypeScript to JavaScript. Remember always that you will not make TypeScript work unless you translate or transpile between one type and the other. And notice because of this, I have in my scripts folder now, I have several files. One is a JavaScript file. We're not touching this one anymore. This is being auto-generated for us, this stuff here. Then there's the app.ts, which is something that we've been working on last week, okay? And an app.js.map file. And the app.js.map file is allowing us to do some troubleshooting with TypeScript. That's what it'll do for us, okay? So those are the three files that are made from just by having this tsconfig.json file and pressing Control-Shift-B. Control-Shift-B starts off the transpile engine. Okay, so that's what this is. Now we need to change some of this stuff because I want to put this up on GitHub. So again, just like last time, Control backtick will remove the remote. Okay, so again, if I was going to type in something like git remote and then -v, I believe, it'll actually give you the verbose version, so you can see where it's pointing. -v gives you the location of the remote. So this is like it's pointing to lesson 11. We can't have this. And notice it says fetch and push. I want to make it so that we make the remote look at something else. So we can say get remote remove origin, and origin is what the remote is called. You can call this whatever you want. So now if I go get remote, there is nothing. Okay, so that's, again, I'm just reviewing this. And then let's put one up on GitHub. So github.com/Centennial College. and we'll make a new repository, make it public, and this time we'll set up a README file after, but let's do it. So I'm going to say COMP125 M2020 less than 12. It gives us steering directions when we put this up. It gives us these two last lines of code. We want to take these two last lines and we want to use them right here in VS Code and press enter. When we do that, it rejigs what we're looking at to the new remote. So if I was going to do in here, if I was going to do clear now, and let's just do that get remote -v, you can see now it's pointing to 12. Okay, this is good. That means I've moved from one remote to the other. This is the location of where I'm looking. The other thing I want is a README file. And what if I did it up online here? So if I refreshed and I have this README, if I add a README online, like up on GitHub, and here's the README, and if I was to save this, so this is less than 12, I'm behind. The master on GitHub is ahead of my remote locally. Guess what? If I try and push now from here to there, it'll not work. Why? Because I'm behind. I only have, if I look at git status here, my status shows me, sorry, git log is what I meant. If I look at git log, you can see that I have a initial commit from last week, right? And I've pushed my initial commit up online where it says added a simple button and label. Those are the two commits I have. However, up online, and this is something where some people are experiencing, I don't know why, Professor, but I can't push. Well, you've added a README file, and if you add a README file, now there's 3 commits. Take a look. There is a commit from the initial commit we did last week. We added a simple button, and guess what? There's the README that we just made. So there's 3 commits online, but there's only 2 commits locally. 2 commits here, which means the only way I can do it, and I can merge. That's one thing I can do. But the easiest way to do it is just before we start working on this, we should pull. So if I do a git pull right now, it's going to pull the commit, the README file, from GitHub locally to my machine. So now you can see that I have my README file here. Okay, so I'm just going through the process with you because some people are, I'm not sure why, but I can't push to GitHub. A lot of the reasons why you can't push to GitHub is because you have a README file in GitHub, or you created a repository with a README file before you push to the repository. And if you do that, or if you don't pull first, if it's not synchronized where both things are the same, it's not going to work. In fact, it's never going to work. It won't work because you have to have the same number and the same commits on GitHub as you do locally on your machine. Okay? Hopefully that clarifies for some of you. Okay, next. So we have this stuff. We have our package. So where do we leave off last day? I always like to start from there. So I'm going to go light-server. Wait. Before we go there, let's go over at package.json. Our package.json says week 11. We're going to go week 12. Our package.json is also a little different in that we have a group of dependencies listed in our package.json and a group of dev dependencies which are also listed. Remember, the dependencies, you need to have them in order for us to have our project working. These are required. That's why it's called dependencies. Dev dependencies are optional. They give you more code hinting. That's what we're hoping from our tool set perspective. That's all it does. Okay? So if you didn't have these, your app would still run. This just makes our lives, hopefully, easier. That's what they're for. Okay? So let's run this thing. So I'll say light-server. And we're going to pull up this Hey Hello Mundo thing that we did last time. Hola Mundo. I said Hello Mundo. Wow, that kind of combination of things. And let's take a look at our console. And if you see an error like this, like for example a favicon, or it says cannot read property width of null, okay, and it says app.ts44. How am I getting these app.ts's thing? Well, remember, the reason why I'm getting app.ts at all is because of the source maps. So this gives me an error that I'm getting. if I go to my error, it says that get bounds width for my bitmap is, it says I don't really know what width is. I don't know what, that's kind of undefined for me from an app.ts perspective. Okay, just let's leave that up there for now. The other thing is I haven't really transpiled. So right now, if you were to do this and not transpile, it can happen, right? And then you're like, wait, I made a change. So let's say I make a change to my app.ts and I want to fix that problem that it's telling me to fix. So I say, okay, I'm going to go to, get bounds and width, and somehow it's a problem and I want to fix it. And I try and fix the problem here. Let's say, for example, I want it, instead of 0.5, I want it to be, 1, right? And I save it, and I'm like, cool, and I go back, and I don't see a change. I'm still having an issue. Even if I refresh, I'm like, I don't know why, but it won't work or something like that sometimes. The reason why is because I haven't transpiled, and I haven't done what my job is supposed to be. I'm supposed to Control-Shift-B. So let's do that now. Control-Shift-B. And this is one of the problems with transpiled language. You forget to transpile, which means anything you change inside your TypeScript file doesn't change in the JavaScript file, and then as a result doesn't get added to my index.html. So let's just do this. There's two options, Tsc Build and Tsc Watch. Guys, you need to have these tool sets working, because next week for your test I will ask you to do stuff with TypeScript. It's going to be 100% that you're going to do stuff with TypeScript. So if you don't know what you're doing here, or if you've never used TypeScript before, you've been avoiding using it, you should probably take a watch here. So Tsc Build only does it once. Tsc Watch will keep transpiling from TypeScript to JavaScript. This is what we want. Okay? Notice on the bottom, the terminal tells us that there's 0 errors found. So wait, where did that error come from? I mean, it disappeared, right? Well, remember what we're doing. We're running our application on a server. And what happens is sometimes, because the order of loading for TypeScript and everything else and JavaScript and all the tool sets we have, you might get a funny error. How does this look online? Does it even work online? Well, remember what we're missing from our file before we move on, before we do anything else, because I want to test it online. We know we need a no Jekyll file. So no Jekyll. And by the way, if you forgot, let's say I forgot how to spell no Jekyll. Oh God, what am I going to do? Go online, look at it. So a no Jekyll file, right? And I don't know, for GitHub, look at how it looks. If I spell it wrong, it's going to correct me, right? So N-O-J-E-K-Y-L-L. That's what I need. N-O-J-E-K-Y-L-L. Okay, cool. N-O-J. So let's rename. E-K-Y-L-L. No Jekyll file. It just has to be empty. That's all you need here. .no Jekyll. If there's a problem, and if it's wrong, so if I say no Jekyll, right? And it shows you bypassing Jekyll on GitHub pages. This is what we're doing, because Jekyll will try and load its own. It has its own way of doing things. So we need to have this no Jekyll file in the root of my page. Okay, so that's the first thing. So I've added this. Okay, now I got to push this to GitHub. This whole thing. So again, I'm going to use my command to do it. I'll make a new little PowerShell with this little plus button. I'm going to do it manually. I could have done it for here as well, but I might as well do it through here. So I'll say git add dot, git commit -m, and I'll say added dot no Jekyll file, git push. Okay, and this will push it up to the remote. So now we're up to date. So now the remote has a no Jekyll file. Now I can see if I can push this to GitHub pages. Remember, it might take time to propagate across the internet, but I want to be able to do that so I can test things live. What it looks like locally may not how it works live. So that's the thing to test. Whenever you're testing live on your site, and you'll have to do this for your test, you should test to see what it looks like. You should test to see how it feels. Okay? All right, so let's go to settings, and we're going to go again. I'm going to scroll down to this area here where it says GitHub pages. And I'm going to choose from nothing to master. And as soon as I do that and click, this is interesting. Look at this. They've changed something yet again, these guys, right? They've they've actually started allowing you to look anywhere you want. For example, in a /docs folder. That's very interesting, which means you could create, instead of looking at the root, you can create a subfolder called /docs. This is beta, that's why it says beta. And what it'll allow you to do is when you go to the /docs, you can put in a distribution version of your website inside /docs, but a development version of your website inside the root, and you can make it look in here. That's great that GitHub is doing that. Save. All right, cool. So now it's propagating. It's going to take time to build. It may not work immediately. Please don't expect it to. If you guys expect this thing to work right away, and some people are like, Tom, I don't know why, but it doesn't work. Give it a second. If it still doesn't work, then there might be an issue. So let's try it and see if it works. Does it work? Okay, we're getting something, but I'm missing my button. Just the same problem we had before. If I refresh, you can see it's clearly missing my button. Something's wrong. So what is the problem? Let's go and inspect. Go to console, and then let's see what it says. Okay, so there's that problem again. It says uncaught type error, cannot read property width of null. Why? Why can't it read the property width of null? Where is it looking for me not to look at that property width of null? And so now we can do some troubleshooting, because somehow it works locally, but remote, no. So part of it could be our pathing, right? So remember, we're looking at /assets images click me button.png. But if we did this, and if there was a problem, then we're hoping, this is the hope, that we would get an error saying, your pathing is incorrect, 404 error, because we're trying to find click me button and it doesn't exist. Okay? But the way we do this is, if we're sitting inside this scripts folder, do I have to go up one to the assets folder and then down into the images folder? Is that where it is? So let's try that. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to go up one to the assets folder, to the root. That's what I want to do. Then into the assets folder, and then into the images, and then click me button. Is this the problem? So let's save that. And again, when we save it, we can test it locally. So we want to always test it locally. So this is our local. And we can look over here and see what the problem is. Okay, so now we have that problem back locally. Remote, local. And both are having trouble with this app.ts44, right? Which is the width property. Its width's looking like it's wrong. So what is the problem? Well, if I go get bounds, if I kind of scroll over get bounds, right, and it says get bounds is a function, right, and width is a property, or so we think. Let's take a look and see what's happening. Remember, we're instantiating a new object of type bitmap here. So can we inspect the object here? Can I do a console log of my click me button and see what I get? Okay, that's the first thing that I would do. I would kind of look here. We're also going to do some other kind of troubleshooting as well. So what do I get here? So I get, well, now it started again. So finally, somehow it started before it wasn't. And if I go through here and if I look through, you can see that in my object, I've got an image, and I can scroll through, and I want to try and find where that image is. Here it is, localhost 3000 assets images click me button.png. Hey, let's try and take this link, and if I put it up here, I should be able to see that image. Do I? Yes. And this is the problem. Do we find this image in the first place? So what about if I did this to my GitHub pages? So if I took this little thing here, /assets images and so on, and I went to my thing up here, and at the end, after lesson 12, if I put that in, right, will it find my button? That's important. So it does. So it does find my button. So that is the correct, kind of path. So that, relative path is good. All right. And that's important to try, guys, because if it doesn't work, then you'll still get this error. But there's another problem that we're experiencing. It's not the get bounds problem. It's the width problem. Okay. And what happens is when I hover over get bounds, it says it returns a rectangle. Let's take a look at the documentation for this problem. So whenever you want to go to the documentation of CreateJS, go to CreateJS. There's a link called docs. and then it'll take you to this. You can get links for any one of the libraries. There's 4 libraries. The one we're working with right now is Easel.js. Let's go to docs. Under docs, we can look at that thing that we were talking about, which is my bitmap. Here's bitmap. Under bitmap, right, and you're going to go through this, guys, when you build stuff on your own for your assignment, right? I'm going to build most of it with you. Here, there's getBounds. Look, under methods, there's getBounds. Hey, let's go there. getBounds. Okay, cool. getBounds returns a triangle, it says. Okay. And it has x, y, width, and height. That's what getBounds returns. Okay? X, y, width, and height. So then why am I getting occasionally this error where it doesn't understand width and height? Comes down to the order of loading, right? That's what it comes down to. The problem is I'm trying to load my site and it might not work at the same time, even though down in here I've said wait until the page is loaded, then call the start, thing up here. Here's start. There's start. And I'm instantiating stage, hello button, hello label, and click me button. I'm instantiating these things. And it's going to go in order. Remember that sometimes this will trigger, right? These things will trigger here before this order. So how to fix that? Preloading. And we're going to do preloading right away. All right? So the way we work with preloading is if I go to the preload.js, so if I go back out to docs, right? It's going to scroll back out to docs. Then there's something called Preload.js. Preload.js, the way it works is it allows me to preload my images and sound. If I go to docs for preload, it will give me a starter. What preload does is it creates something called a queue. Think about this as using Ajax. That's what this thing does at the end of the day, right? So think about, instead of queue, let's call the queue your assets. All right, that's what it is. I want to make an asset atlas or an asset container. Call it whatever you want, right? So this assets file or queue, I make a new queue of assets. I put everything into almost like a, and the reason why it's called a queue is interesting because what it does is it creates almost like a stack of display objects that I want to put inside here. That's what it does. All right. So I can wait for the, look at this, queue on. That means there's an event listener. If the queue is finished loading on complete, then what am I going to do? Call the start function. In the handle complete part, I'm going to go start only when, if and only if, things are finished loading. This is important, my friends. So this is what I want. So instead of me going right to start, all right, here's something new. We talked about compartmentalization a little bit last week, and reusable stuff is what we're doing this week. I'm going to go and make a brand new function on the top, and we're going to call this function preload. So preload. Okay, so preload is going to be called instead of start. So let's do that. So down in here where we're starting on start, we're not going to start on start. We're going to start at preload. So when the window finishes loading, we're going to call the preload function now. Okay, it's going to go up here. And what preload does is load everything up for us. Do all that preloading stuff, all the Ajax stuff is going to be done in here. Okay, we need to have some stuff happen for us to do this. So we're going to make a new object. We're going to call it assets, okay, which is going to be of type load queue. Okay, CreateJS load queue. Okay, that's what it's going to be. CreateJS load queue. And what we want is we want to say that assets is equal to a new CreateJS load queue. Okay, just that first part. So first we make a new load queue. That's what it is. It's almost like a new container. That's what it is. The next part is we can install plugins for what we want to load. So example, if I want to load sound, and I don't have any sound to load right now, but let's suppose I do, let's put that in just in case. So for you, you'll already have it. So assets dot, I want to install a plugin and I want to make sure that it's CreateJS.sound. CreateJS.sound is what I put in as a plugin. I'm going to follow the exact same thing here so you can see that. All right, so when we do this, we say that let's enable sound to be preloaded as well. So not just images, but sounds. So this is, we're just setting up here. Okay, we're not quite done. Next, on complete. I like that. So we're going to say assets.on, and this is like add event listener. Complete is the event type. What are we going to do? Call the start function. When the assets are finished loading, call the start function. Then do all this stuff. So we're not going to do anything else or even call main until everything is finished loading. There's going to be a bit of delay this is going to cause. That's okay. It's going to be very minor. Next, we need a load queue, and we're going to call this manifest thing. We're going to make an asset manifest. Okay, so we're going to say asset.manifest, right? And I want to make a manifest, which is load manifest. That's what it says here, load manifest. The manifest is, think about like almost like an array of objects. An array of objects to load, okay? There's two parts of these objects. The first part of the objects are the friendly name or ID of the object. Okay, so we're going to say ID is equal to what? Well, I want to load my click me button. That's the friendly name, followed by the source. There's the source, right? My source path. That's my next object, the next part of my object. This is an object, right, that I'm making. Okay, does this make sense so far? An ID, click me button, and the source. What's the source? This is the source. All right, so I'm saying, hey, go look here for my object. That's where you're supposed to look. Okay, so that is my manifest. So far, it has one object, this. Okay, and it's being loaded right here. Okay, so far so good. So it's telling me where to look. And that's what preloading does. Preloading says, hey, take this thing, load it up, and now we have a friendly name for it called click me button. All right, how do I use it? So now what's going to happen is this is not going to go to start until this finishes loading. That's what's going to happen, because this is an event. This event is going to be triggered when we're finished loading this bitmap. And this is important because we're loading assets ahead of time. In fact, if you play any games nowadays, modern games, you might see a load screen. The load screen is doing exactly this. It's loading or preloading all the assets, sounds, images, whatever, right? Code too. And what it's going to do is once it's finished loading, then you can play the game. So we have everything in memory. And what this does, it prevents things like memory fragmentation and inconsistent performance and stuff like that. It's already loaded. You're going to have the same memory used all the time. This is what this is doing. Okay, good. So now how do I use this? Well, if you notice here in the next part, it's we need to access the queue. In our case, it's called assets. And then we have to use get results, and then followed by the friendly name that we mentioned earlier. All right, cool. So that means down in here, where we use CreateJS bitmap, we're going to say, hey, instead of doing this string, we're going to say, hey, assets, I want to get result of the friendly name, which is click me button. This guarantees that I'm going to get my button loaded before I try and get boundaries. How can I get a boundary for a button that hasn't finished loading it? Sometimes I'll get it, sometimes I won't. And that's why sometimes we get this working, and sometimes it doesn't. Because it really is asynchronous. It depends on when we load the button so I can measure it. That's what this does. I could also hard code this. If I know the button size, I can just put a number in here. But that's not the exercise. All right, cool. Let's see if this works for us. So first we're going to go back up to our page locally, which is this one. And let's see if this solves our problem locally, which is this one. And it looks like it does. Every single time we load now. And let's just get rid of that console log to be sure. Right? Every time we load now, it's good. Right? The click me button works. Right? And it's okay. Now let's test this online. Now that we got it working locally, we added a preloader. Right? This preload function, right? So this triggers first. So this function triggers first and preloads all the assets. That's what we want. We want to preload everything. Then this function triggers next. After everything has been preloaded. This function is used for config and initialization. Start. Okay? That's how it goes. So this is first, this is second, and then update will happen every time we have a change. It'll update, you know, the stage. It'll erase and redraw the screen 60 times per second. That's what it'll do. Cool. We have some changes. Let's go up on GitHub and make this change. So we're going to say I want to load all of these into my staging area. So we'll click the plus button. I'm going to go here. I'm going to say added preloading, right? And check mark and push. And what this will do is it'll push it up to GitHub. Now the preloading, this new commit may not happen right away on GitHub pages. So don't be upset if I refresh and it's not updated. Okay, let's refresh anyway. And it doesn't. It hasn't gone there yet because why? It says, you know what? It says assets. We're getting a 404 right now for my assets on clickmebutton.png. Look what it's trying to do is assets, images, clickmebutton.png. We're not finding it somehow. This is a different error than what we had before. And it's trying to measure something where we can't find it, right? And why? Because it's going up one. This is actually, the path is wrong, right? Let's try that again. So if I refresh, we're still getting that path problem, right? So it's going to go up one, and it's trying to go up one on Centennial. Remember this whole thing about the way it works, especially with preloading. And I'm pointing this out to you guys so you understand what's happening here. It's looking at Centennial College, and it's ignoring this other stuff. It's ignoring the actual path, which is this. This path exists, right? So what's happening is it's going up one, right? And it's going to the wrong place. Let's try going back to what we did before. If I did this, what happens here if I change this one locally? So the path is changed now. All right, and first let's do it locally and see what happens locally. So locally we get no problem, right? Locally we're good. What if I push this up remotely? So I said something like, okay, updated path for objects, right? You know, in the manifest, in asset manifest. Let's see. So this is, let's say if it's this, is that the problem, right? Again, we're troubleshooting, guys, right? So we're trying to figure out why it's not working remotely, but it's working locally. And sometimes it's just a matter of it just hasn't updated, and we can beat ourselves, you know, beat ourselves up and stuff. Meanwhile, you just need to give it a sec. Okay, so we push this. Don't expect immediate results. If this doesn't work, or if this doesn't change, don't worry about it. Don't get upset about it. Just wait. And you can see clearly nothing has changed, right? So I'm not going to get upset about this. The other way to check this problem, right, is to use another browser. So let's try another browser and go to something like Firefox, right, where we don't have cache. We don't have a cache, not now. And just put that in and see what happens. Do we get that button? And now you can clearly see that there's an error, right? If there wasn't an error, then you wouldn't have this problem. We're having the same error happen, right? Here's the error, uncaught type error. Get bounds is null. And the reason why get bounds is null is because we're getting an error with our, it's a 404 error that we're getting. There is no get bounds, right? That's happening. And that's why this is happening the way it is. Again, let's wait and we'll fix it in a second, okay? Because I don't want to make an assumption that this is the problem if it hasn't propagated, right? Like if I click this, sometimes the error will go away, right? And I don't want that to happen. I want it to either always be there or not be there, right? So that's some of it. Leave it alone. Let's just not go there for now. Let's just do it locally like this because we know it's going to work. I'm going to put it back because I don't think that's the problem. But let's just put it back to what it is, okay? Because this preloads everything for us, number one. Next. We have been trying to make stuff work like this. And I have a hello label and I have a click me button. And, yeah, this is nice. But the problem with this is if I want to make another label, I got to do all this work. What do I do? I need to make classes. All right? I need to make classes. So this means that I want to make a label class and I want to make a button class. So I can reuse some of the same structure in my new button, in my new label, and so on. Okay, that's what I want. How do I do this? Okay. Well, there's two things I can't do. First of all, I won't be able to reuse my click me button. This is going to be written on the fly. Whatever I do in my click me button is going to be unique for every button. However, maybe I want the same effect for my mouse over and mouse out. These things can be something that I can reuse. So I don't have to do this every single time for every button. Imagine if I had 5 buttons and I had to make on mouse over, on mouse out for each button. Too much, right? I want to hide this in the class implementation somehow. Same thing with a lot of this precursor stuff, this setup. Okay. Which leads me down the road of I want to make an object that I want to display on the screen, right? And how do I do that? I could make it a bitmap, right? I could make buttons a bitmap. I could do that, right? But there's going to be some things that I want to display in a real game and some things that I don't want to display, right? Hence the idea of a game object versus a drawable game object. The two different things, all right? So let's think about a game object as something that I want to be able to place on the screen or in my game that I can use. A game object there's 3 possibilities for a game object we'll talk about. A game object that can be drawn only, but no updates. A good example of that is a background. Maybe I never want to update the background. It's a game object that's drawable, but is not updatable, right? Then there's the other one. A game object that is updatable, but not drawable. So what would that be like? Checkpoint would be a good example of that. Some kind of collision area where you can't see anything, but in the background something's happening, right? So something that can't be seen. A spawn point for an enemy or a bullet or something. Spawn point means something where some things are going to appear. You're going to kind of place something in the game, but no one can see it. It's invisible. So that's the second one. And then the third type is when I want to draw and I want to update something. So that's things like enemies, players. That could be buttons. All these other things. So there's 3 types of game objects that I can have. 3 types. We're going to deal with the ones that update and draw. Okay, we're not going to delineate between ones that can't update or can't draw. So we're just going to make one. So let's start off with another script up here, and we're going to start off without making a game object. I'm going to make a label. All right, that's the first one. So let's do another one. So I'll make a new file. We're going to call this before we get there, one thing else we have to consider is organization. If I keep adding files to this folder, I'm going to go crazy pretty soon because I'm going to have lots and lots of files here, right? Because I'm going to get 3 files for every one. And yes, I could make it so that it puts the stuff in a final folder with my tsconfig.json file. I can specify an output folder. Yes, I could do that. But for now, without complicating things more than they are, maybe what I want is another folder in here where I can do some organization. So I'm going to make a new folder first, and we're going to call this folder UI objects. Okay, a UI objects folder. So UI objects are user interface objects like buttons and labels and sliders and whatever else you want to make. Okay, remember these are all custom made things. There is no button, there is no label. There's just text and bitmaps right now. Okay. So I want to put them in here. I want to make a new file inside of my UI objects called label.ts. What this will do is it'll transpile to an empty JavaScript file because remember we have watch happening on TypeScript. TypeScript is constantly watching and transpiling or converting things from TypeScript to JavaScript. All right, that's what's happening. In TypeScript, what we want to do is we want to create a namespace or module. We're going to call this UI objects. UI objects. And you can do UI objects, or you can do UI objects. You have to choose what you want. I'm going to do it this way, UI objects, because then it makes more sense to me. UI for user interface, objects with a capital O for objects that I want to use in the user interface. UI objects. Inside my UI objects, I want to make a new class that I'm going to export called label, which is going to extend, guess what? My CreateJS text object. So my label is going to be a text object. It will be a text object. So I need a few things. Let's do some pseudocode. I need some private fields or class members, variables, whatever you want to call them. We're also going to have some public properties, maybe. I'm going to also have some constructors. I might have a private method of some kind. Oops. Let's try that again. Private. Oh, darn it. Private methods. More than one. And some public methods. Okay, there we go. So this is my scaffold. I'm just using this as a place where I know every class is going to have this stuff. Okay, so if this is true, then I want to start with the constructor. Let's start with the constructor function. So constructor, and then we know because we're inheriting, we need to satisfy the super constructor. My super constructor needs text, font, string color, and that's what it needs, like we did already, right? But I want to go further than this. In my constructor function, I want to take the following. I want to take the text of my label, so text, which is going to be of type string. So that's label text or label string. I need to also take the font size, which is going to be a string. My font family, I want to break it up a little bit. I also want, which is also a string, by the way. I also want my font color, which is also a string. So those are the things I need. Okay. Hey, while we're at it, let's also give optionally, I want a x and y coordinates. So I also want an x, which is an integer, which I'm going to default to 0. And y, which is an integer, which I'm also going to default to 0. By the way, this looks very similar to what we did with and now int is not really an int. We got to call it a number in JavaScript, right? Because int's not an actual type, but number is. Number covers integers and floats. Now, when we do this, we have a constructor that we're going to listen for our label. By default, we need to have these. These are required: text, font size, font family, font color. Do I have to make them all required? What if I want defaults? Let's do that. So I want my font color to be black by default. So let's do that. So I'm going to say that my font color is 000000. Okay, that's my default. Okay, what's my default for font family? Let's make it Consolus, something, anything. You can make it whatever your favorite font family, Arial, whatever. Me, I'm going to make it Consolus. Okay, that's going to be my default. Okay, and what about my font size? Let's make it 20. Some kind of value, 20 pixels, by the way. You have to put pixels, px, in there. All right, cool. So I have my defaults. The only thing now that's required is my string value, my text. And I can even default that. So I can say, hey, if you don't put anything, then we're not going to make it any value whatsoever. Now that I've done all this, let's put it on multiple lines so you can see all the, just to make it more clear for you, because I'm taking too much real estate. I'm just going to put it on different lines. Okay, it doesn't have to be. I'm just splitting up the constructor so you can see it. It doesn't have to be look like this at all. If you can fit it in one line for yourself, that's fine. I'm making it so that you can see it here. Okay. By the way, I'm getting this little underline because it doesn't like Consolus. It doesn't know what that word is. I have a linter that takes care of it. Okay. my super constructor requires, first of all, they're all optional, just like my constructor is. But I might as well pass in my text. I might as well pass in my font. Okay, font has to be passed in like this. Font underscore size plus font underscore family. Okay, so that's how it's going to be passed in. I'm computing my font size and family. And then I'm going to pass in my font color. Font color. Okay. This satisfies my constructor requirements and allows me to create some stuff with extra. I have extra capability here because I've added a new class. I'm making a new class called this. Okay, cool. You know what would be also nice? What if I had some labels that were centered and other labels that were not? For example, in my current build, the way I have it is this label is centered. But what if I want labels to be kind of left aligned or right aligned or something else? Right now, I don't have an option for that the way I've put it in. So we should probably say at least it should be either centered or not. How about that? So let's put in a value over here that we'll call it is centered. And we'll make it a Boolean value. And we'll make it by default false. It's not centered by default. You have to specify that it's centered. Or, you know what? If we say that most of our labels are going to be centered, we should say that it's true, depending on how you want your labels to function. Me, I'm going to say most of my labels are not centered. I have to specify that it's centered or not. Okay, are we clear on this? So here I'm making a class, right, inside my UI objects namespace or module, right? And I've created a constructor that allows me to take in some stuff. One thing that's missing is we have to deal with X, Y, is centered. These three things we haven't dealt with. Let's put that after the super constructor. So we're going to say that this dot x is equal to x, this dot y is equal to y. So we're going to say that if you give me y and x values, I'm going to align them, whatever they are. By default, it's 0. Then I want to say is centered. So if is centered, right? If it's true, then what do I want to do? I want to change my registration values. That means that regex, right, is equal to this dot get measured width, like we did before, get measured width, multiplied by 0.5. I'm changing the registration values on the x, and this dot reg y, just like the registration value, the focal point, or the pivot, if you will, is dot get measured height times 0.5. It's all the same stuff we did last week. Okay, so all I'm doing is saying, so I'm configuring, I'm saying if this is centered, then do this. Okay? Cool. And so we're good. We've got x values, we've got this, but you know what? This probably should be after this. We want to probably check to see if it's centered first before we align things. Okay, so let's do this. Nice. So this is your constructor. Any private methods right now? Nope. Any public methods right now? Nope. Any public properties right now? Probably would want to be able to center it or not center it. I also want to be able to set text on my object, because if I set text, change the text value, then I should try and get it centered or not. So let's try this out. And also, I want to check to see if it's centered or not. I want to be able to check for that. So a couple things we can do. I want to create some private instance members that I keep track of that stuff. So one is the is center stuff. I want to make it private. I want to say that it's called is centered. And we'll use the M underscore. M underscore is centered, right? Which is a Boolean. It's going to be private, right? Is centered, okay? If it's centered, I also want to keep track of it. So inside if is centered, right, I want to say that is centered is equal to whatever it is. So let's just keep track of the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot is centered, but I want a property to be in the middle, right, for me. So let's see how that works. The properties in TypeScript work like this. I need to use get. I think I've shown you this before. The name of the new property is centered. I'm using a capital I for this one. And I'm going to return a Boolean value. All right. So this is the getter. This is how the getter looks. And then I'm going to return this dot underscore m underscore is centered. Okay, that's what it works. So get. And then I also want a setter. So set is centered. And I want to say it's going to have a new value. So we'll call it value Boolean. Value could be whatever you want it to be. Remember, you don't have to, it's not set in stone. You can make this variable called whatever you want it, or this parameter. And then I'm going to say that this dot m underscore is centered is equal to value. Now, why m underscore? I talked about this before. Underscore might mean private. M is member. A private member variable that is a Boolean. You could even go as far as saying m underscore b for Boolean is centered. I'm not going to do that. This is enough. M underscore is centered. That's what it means. It means it's private. Okay, so set is centered, get is centered, right? As an example, I could even go with lowercase I because is centered and M is centered is different. As long as these two are different than this, but these two are the same, I'm good. Okay, so this makes more sense for me. And now I have a method, a mechanism that I can say something like this dot is centered is equal to is centered, which means that if it's centered, it's going to be stored inside of my property, which is going to finally be stored inside this private member field. I'm doing this. I want to show you how to build classes that make sense now. We've been practicing classes, but there has been no practical application until now. Okay? Well, yes and no. Anyway. So that's one thing. So these are getters and setters for is centered. Well, you know what? This, if I center something, then I need to do this. Right? Again. This centering stuff. This regex stuff. And if I need to do this anyway, why would I do it here? I don't have to do it here. I could do it inside my is centered. If it's true, then I do this. If not, don't do this. Regex and reg-y would be 0, right? So I can take this, I can transport it out of here, and if is centered is true, if this is true, this is the power of doing a property as opposed to a just direct accessing a data member. I can say if it's true, and I can say if this value is true, right? Then what I want is for my regex and reg-y to do this, okay? Otherwise, and I can't use a ternary operator. I know some of you are thinking about that. This dot regex is going to be equal to 0, and this dot reg-y is also going to be equal to 0. Why 0, 0? We talked about this. Whenever you have any objects in CreateJS, and if I was going to look at an object, just a generic object here, let's say it's a square. All right, and let's just do black. So here's an object, which is a square. Any object. Then by default, all objects are centered up here, top left corner, right? If I center them though, if I say is centered is true, I'm saying, okay, don't make this the center, make this the center, okay? And if, so what happens is I have to calculate half of the x coordinate and then half of the y coordinate. That's what I'm doing to make this the center. I'm saying march the center from here to the right and down. What's really happening actually is you're marching back. I'm saying make an offset. When you start drawing, start back this way and start up this way. That's what's really happening. But what I'm really telling for you guys is go to the right and then down. This is where the center is going to be, but start drawing up here. Okay? So that's what's happening. So I'm saying, okay, if it's centered, then set the registration values. If not, make them 0, okay, like defaults. Why would I do this? Because I know that if I press is centered at any time, I want to be able to do this. I want to set it even after the value is true. Okay, even after it's true, I want to set the registration mark. Okay. So that's one thing. And so I'm going to say that it's centered. When I go here, it's automatically going to access this from here, from my constructor. My constructor is going to access the setter and set up registration marks for myself. That's what I'm hoping. All right, and then I'll do this X and Y coordinate stuff. So this is the first part. Is it centered, yes or no? All right, this is a great place to test it. How do I test it? Guys, it's never going to be available to you, this thing, unless I include it in your index.html. In my index.html, I'm going to have some more custom application code, just like before. I'm going to have my core scripts, and I'm going to have my UI objects. So I want to say, here are my UI objects, right? And these ones, this is my core script. That's what this is. Core script. Okay, UI objects are going to be here. I need a script source. Again, this is just documentation. /scripts / UI objects / label.ts label.js. Has to be JS. Makes sense? So I'm adding it into the manifest, which is my index.html. Remember, my index.html is the only thing this has is just a canvas element, and that's it. There's nothing else on the entire file, right? Really, at the end of the day. I could add more custom CSS and stuff too, but that's all it has. And then it has a bunch of third-party libraries, your libraries, and that's it. Okay, so I'm saving it. I'm going to go back out, and let's take a look at the JavaScript that was generated. You can see for ECMAScript 2015, this old code has been generated, and a bunch of vars, right? Why? Because I specified in here, in my tsconfig.json, ECMAScript 5. Let's move with something more modern, guys. Let's move ECMAScript 6 up the chain and save. What this is going to do is it's going to retranspile, right, everything to the new way of doing things, like this. Much nicer. Okay? Same thing with this. It's all going to be compatible. The JavaScript on the back end is going to be nice and compatible with this, which is what we want. Okay, wonderful. Excelente. All right, we have all this working nicely. Let's see if this actually works by using it. So I'm going to go into my app.ts, and instead of using my label as a CreateJS text label, let's make our hello label something different. We're going to make it of type UI objects dot, and this is something where you have to make sure it's spelled properly. UI objects is what it's called, dot label. Notice that mine comes up nicely. UI objects dot label now is what it's called. UI object is my namespace, that's my module. Label is my new class, and I'm defining this one as that type of object. If I scroll down, hello label does not conform to CreateJS.text anymore. I want to use some of this, but I want to rejig it for what it's going to look like with my label, which means I got to change this to UI label or UI objects dot label. Still have a problem. This is okay, but this is not okay, right? I need to break this up so that it goes like this. So although consoles black is the way it's going to go, 60 pixels is different size. What I could do is, I know it's going to be centered, so that's why I have to add in is centered. So I can say is centered, X and Y coordinates. My X coordinate is going to be 320. My Y coordinate is going to be 240, and is centered is true. That is my new constructor, my friends. Which means, guess what? All of this is gone. That's my new label. Let's see if this works, right? Because that's an important part, right? So save it, go back out, go locally, and hey, look at that. And what about this? It still works okay, but wouldn't it be nice if instead of having all of this extra code here, that I could just set my text, and when I set my text, it changes the width and height, so that way my regx and reg-y is get measured width and height. How do I do that? Another method. So I go back to label.ts, and here I have is centered, And here I have my text. So I want to make this new thing where I want to set my text. I'm going to make that a public method instead. Set text. I don't need to get text. I can just use the text property for that, right? But I need to use a setter only. So I can say public set text, and then the new text that I want, new text, which is a type string. And it's going to return void. I'm not going to have this method return anything, right? And my set text method, what it's going to be is when you set the text, I'm going to measure it again. I'm going to do all this work again, okay? Okay, whoa. So it really depends if it's centered again or not, right? If is centered, then do this, right? If it's centered. And I can check to see if it's centered by the getter. If it's centered, then is centered is true, then you want to jig this again. But it's like I want to do this part by itself, like it's its own method. Now, you got to be careful of the order here, but it's almost like I want to be able to do recenter or recalculate width or something like that. A little private method. Let's see if I can do that. So I'll make a little private method here. We'll say m underscore recalculate width or recalculate size. Recalc size, right? It's going to return void. And recalculate size is something that I want it to be used way earlier, so I want to try and use it here. When I grab this, and I want to do this, and this is only going to be used if it's centered. If not, it's going to be this, right? So I'm going to say recalculate size. M underscore recalculate size is going to be here. Now, this m underscore recalculate size. So basically, if it's centered, it's going to recalculate the size, which is going to trigger this function. And the same thing goes with set text. If is centered, this dot is centered, right? Then we're going to recalculate size, right? This dot m underscore recalculate size. Okay, so it's going to trigger this effect again if it's centered. If not, don't worry about it. Text is equal to new text, right? This dot text is equal to new text. Actually, if anything, we should probably set the text first before we recalculate size. Either way, so we're going to say something like this, right? Set text. The x and y coordinates are going to remain the same, but the reg x and reg y values are going to change. Does this make sense? So every time I set the text, then it's going to check to see if I'm centered or not. If it is, it's going to recalculate my center, and this will take care of. I'm going to save this. All of this problem, right? And instead of using text directly, I wouldn't use text directly. I would say hello label dot set text. Just a different way of doing things, and I would drop in something that looks like this. And now I don't need any of this. Again, I'm trying to simplify, my friends. Trying to simplify. And the same thing goes here. So set text, that goes here. And get rid of all this. So that's a reuse case, right? So far, so good. Let's see if it works. Okay, let's see if this works. So I'm going to go back to here, and hey, look at that. Hey, look at that. It works great. And not only does it work great, but we've actually added a reusable label that I can use over and over again. That's a one-liner, not several lines. We've suffered everything inside of here, inside of our class, and this is a good prototype for us. Let's do the same thing with our button. But first, let's put this up on GitHub for you. So I'm going to go here to plus. This is going to add this to the commit. And I'm going to say added label UI object. Okay, so I'm going to click plus or this little check mark, and then push, which is going to have everything up online for you. At the same time, it's going to create our have our label run online up here, right? And if I refresh, you can see now that there's some more issues. One thing to note is you can tell that it hasn't updated for a couple reasons. One, I know that mine says less than 12. I kind of did this on purpose. And here online it says less than 11, right? So that I know it just hasn't had a chance to update. Give it a chance. And when it updates, you're going to see it update. Don't panic. This is a good example of something that's wrong because it says HTTP assets images click me button is not found, and don't worry about it. Okay, move on. All right, so great. Any questions around what I've done so far by using, I made some reusable code in my label.ts. That's a new class we made. Any questions around that? I'm going to do it again now with my button.ts. We're going to make it a bitmap button. There's different kinds of buttons we can create. We can make a button that's made from scratch, like some kind of shape button that I make programmatically, right? Here, I'm just going to make it a bitmap button, okay? So if it's a bitmap button, I'm going to right-click. I'm going to add a new file, right? I'm going to call this button.ts. It's also going to be in the same module, UI objects. I'm also going to export it, export class button, which extends the CreateJS.bitmap pattern. That's what it does, or class. And then let's talk about our stuff. Private methods, or private instance members. I'm gonna get mad at myself now. It's because I'm using members. I'm gonna get mad. There. Public properties. Right? My constructor. Constructors. Right? And we're also going to do private method. Right? Private methods as well as public methods. I like to do this, guys, because this way I've scaffolded out a couple things, right? One, I know what I'm doing, and this is the order that I'm going to have every class function like, beyond my typing errors. Constructor, I know that I need to do first, so I'm going to do the constructor function, right? The constructor function needs a super constructor. What does it need? It needs an image or URL, my canvas element, and now I'm in trouble because I know that I want to make a new object of type with an assets in here, and some kind of assets. I'm going to get my assets in here. I could pass it into the constructor. I could say that what's the asset manager that I'm using, my asset container. I could do that and then install the assets in here. But I know that's going to be messy long term. So now we come to the point where I say, maybe I want some kind of global static that I want to use. By the way, and we're going to talk about this, globals are okay, right? You just have to know how to use them properly, especially for games. Games for globals, we can make it a singleton. We're not going to go there. We can also make it some kind of static, and I think that's where I'm going to go, a static class. It's not going to be a UI object. It belongs somewhere else, like a util folder, or a config folder, right? Something like that. So, and I could call it globals. So config globals. So let's make a new folder. We're going to call it config. Inside my config, we're going to have another file called globals.ts. And this is going to be inside the config namespace or module. Module, config. Again, you might want to make it config capital C just to be fair. right, in my config module, my configuration module, I'm going to make a public static class called globals. All right, public static class. Or we can just make a public class called global. So just like we said, we want to export a class called globals. That might be the best, something like this. And then we'll make public static objects inside the class. So public static, we're going to make one public static thing called assets. Let's call this asset manager for now. Okay? Or asset manifest. How about that? Asset manifest. Asset manifest. Okay? Asset manifest. It's going to be of type CreateJS.loadQ. Okay? So our public static asset manifest is going to be of type CreateJS.loadQ. It's inside config globals, another folder. But guess what? We'll never have access to this little thing unless we add it into my index.html. Let's do that now. And this would be up here. Before any objects we're going to make, we're going to add this in. So config globals. And I'm putting it like that because that way we know what they are. Script source is equal to /scripts /config /globals.js. Now label has access to it, and so does, might as well put buttons. UI object will also put in buttons. So script, just because we're here, before I forget, even though it's not complete, it's -script /UI objects /button.js. We're just putting that in place now. So before we move on, we have buttons connected. Otherwise, it'll never work. So globals is up here. All right, cool. But we have to set this global. We never set it. We declared it, but we never set it. So inside of my app.ts, before I continue, before I forget, I want to make assets, this assets here, equal to asset manifest, which means I have to say something like this. Assets, and I'll do it here at the bottom. I'll say config.globals.asset manifest is equal to assets. So what I'm doing is I'm making a reference that goes from here, and I'm storing it inside my my global asset manifest. All right. So this way, I'm always going to have access to it. I'm still hiding it. I'm hiding it in like 2 levels of globals is the class, config is the namespace, asset manifest is the property, or it could be a method if I want. Okay, so that's what I'm doing, and it's static, which means I don't have to instantiate an object of type globals to make asset manifest happen. Okay, I don't have to instantiate. So this makes the connection for me. This does it right here. Okay. Now, question: should I do it here or should I do it here? Because if I do it here, right, what that means is I might make the connection before it's complete. So I want to wait till it's complete for me to do it, which means I'm not going to do it here. I'm going to wait to go here, and I'm going to make the connection inside of here before main. So before main, I'm going to do one of these. Config globals asset manifest is equal to assets. So I know for sure everything is finished loading before I make that connection. Okay? Now, back to what we were doing before with my UI objects button. Now that I've got this, I know that I can do the following. I can say that my bitmap is going to have the name that I want to put into. So in my constructor, the only thing I really need is the name of my asset, right? So we'll call this asset string. Actually, asset, and it'll be a string. All right, so here's my asset. I got to tell it what it is, right? Which is whatever the button is going to be, right? And this could be a bitmap asset, right? In fact, if I really want to, I can just say bitmap asset. So I know that that's what I'm going to get in my constructor. I'm doing this differently than I've done it in the past, just to make it different. Okay, the next part is, now that I have my bitmap asset, do I want to add in x and y coordinates and register? Yes, x is a number, which we're going to say that is equal to 0. And y is a number, which we're going to set to 0. And haha, is centered. Uh-oh. Now we're seeing that there is a pattern. And now we might think that maybe, false, maybe there's a call for us to have a superclass that's not a bitmap and not a text, but something else that allows me to create, objects like this. Not going to happen today, and we're not going to do this semester. If I was doing a full-blown game course, yes. Now, no. So we're going to say that we're going to pass in the bitmap asset, right? And the bitmap asset, remember, is going to be of type. Okay, that's one thing I have to also talk about here. It's not enough to do bitmap asset. We have to say that, we have to use that asset manifest, right? We're going to say that config.globals.asset manifest get result, and then pass in this thing, right? So the string name is going to be converted into an asset that I can get as a blob. That's what it is. And it gets injected into my superclass, right? Now, x and y coordinates, we don't inject in here, and neither is centered. Centered is another thing. And you know what? I can probably get all the centered stuff from my label. Uh-oh. If I'm copying and pasting, that means that there's an opportunity for me to rejig this later on. So I'm going to copy this whole part, is centered. I'm going to put it into my my button.ts up here. Okay. Recalculate size I also need to make that complete. So I'm going to go back to label.ts and grab this recalculate size thing and go back into my button class and plop it inside my private area there. But we can't use get measured width. Remember, get measured width is the difference. We need to use get bounds. And we can't just use get bounds. We have to use get bounds.width. We have to measure it, right? And the same thing, get bounds.height is what we want to use here, as opposed to get measured height. Get bounds.height. All right, so that's the difference between this recalculate version and the other one. So it's slightly different. Okay. Cool. So we have is centered here, and now we're going to say the same thing. We're going to say that this dot is centered is equal to is centered, right? And we're going to say that this dot x is equal to x, and this dot y is equal to y. So that kind of calculates everything, puts it into place, and away we go. Now that is for a bitmap, but our bitmap is not just a bitmap, it's also a button. This is for any bitmap. That would be great if I made my own bitmap class, my own texture class. But we're not making a texture class, we're making a button. It's a specialized form of bitmap. Okay, in my mind again, I'm thinking this could use a superclass, like a game object superclass or something else. But we're not doing that right now. Notice what I'm saying. Don't make a game engine, make a game. Don't make an app engine, from scratch. Maybe you're never going to do another one of these, right? Wasting your time making something that's too much generic is going to spend more time, making code than actually making it work. Remember, my motto to you is make it work first, refactor afterwards. Better. Okay? All right, so this is good. We've got this. We've got the recalculate size. We need a public method now to be able to do hover effects, right? So now let's just steal that from my app.ts. Well, we know that we've done a couple things now. Our click me button is no longer a bitmap. It's going to be a UI objects dot button. Okay, that's what we're going to make it. Our own. These are our own two things now. And as we go down, let's take a look here. Click me button has to be a new UI objects.bitmap. UI objects.bitmap. Sorry, dot button. I'll be okay. And it can't be this. It's just this, because we don't need to pass in the type yet. We can just do one of these. Click me button. So I want to make a new button of type click me button, but I also want to pass in the x and y coordinates, 320 and 340, and also if it's centered or not. True. And then all of this disappears. Right? Nice button. We're going to make a button. It's called Click Me Button. Where's the location? And is it centered or not? Nice. Cool. This stuff has to stay. I can't do anything here because every button is going to have its own click event. All right? But this stuff can be part of it. So let's grab all this and cut it out. So all buttons are going to have some kind of hover effect. Let's take this and put it inside of my button. And we're going to put it as a method. But we can't make it called click me button dot on. All right? We want to make it so that we want these events to be inside the constructor. And we want, so let's take these out of here, put them in the constructor for now. So at the bottom of the constructor, we're going to say this, because this is a button, dot on mouse over, this dot on mouse out. But instead of this dot alpha being in here, we could leave it like this, right? This is one way of doing it. Or we can make it private members, my private instance variables, which let's do that way. So I'm going to make it so that there's two private methods. One private method. We don't want this to be public. Private. One private method is m underscore mouse over, which returns void. And the other one is mouse out, just to make it so that it's a little bit different than the other one. M underscore mouse out. And it's more descriptive a little bit for you guys when you're reading the code. Like when you do a good read of someone's code, you should know what's happening, right? And I want to grab all of this alpha stuff. So when I'm mousing over, I want this to happen. Mouse over. And when I'm mousing out, I want this to happen. Mouse out. And I don't need to do this. In fact, I can get rid of all this stuff and just say this dot mouse over. Mouse over. Okay, that's what that's happening. So that's going to call the mouse over event when I do the mouse over. This is the event handler that's going to be tied into the button. Okay, and the same thing is going to happen here. I'm going to just replace this with this dot m underscore mouse out. Okay, so that's how it's going to work. Button done. So I do the events here. So these are the events. Events for mouse events. Well, let's call this mouse events. Okay. And these are over and out. And I'm modifying the alpha. When the mouse over triggers, I'm going to put the alpha to 70%. When it's out, it's going to be 100% again. And there's no public methods. These are all private because we don't have to expose this stuff to the public. All right, cool. So let's see if that would work. Then let's go back to my app.ts and see if there's anything that's missing. That's it. Look how beautiful that is now. It's way better than what it was, right? It's cut down a lot, and it looks like something that I can look at, right? I can read this thing. I understand what's happening. I preload, then I go to my start. I make a reference to my asset manager. My update function happens every frame. Right? And this is my main where all the fun happens. Okay? Cool. Let's see if all of this took hold and we're good to go. Looks good. If I hover over, hey, I get my hover event. And if I click it, then I'm good to go. Right? So everything is fantastic. And this, my friends, is the power of reusability. Right? It gives you, it harkens right back to what you were doing with C#, right? Because you've been doing this reusable object stuff with C#. You've been doing it for a while now, and it's the same stuff we're doing here in JavaScript. Exactly the same. And this is the stuff that we're going to be doing when we use Angular in COMP125 in the future as we move forward next semester, as well as Node.js. We're going to use a lot of reusable objects and things that we're going to get from the internet, and we're going to use TypeScript and JavaScript for a lot of it. Okay? All right, let's see if this finally updated. If I refresh, did it update yet? Hey, it updated, but still there's a problem. But still there's a problem with width, and also it doesn't like my pathing. My pathing, this definitely updated now. So we know it's because this is less than 12. So pathing-wise, it's looking in the wrong spot. Look at that. Looking in the wrong spot. So that can't work. Okay? All right, cool. So that's definitely still an issue, but this is good. I'm going to put this up on GitHub now for you, but let's see if we can fix that finicky pathing problem. Because I'd like to make this work. So we know it's here. This is the wrong, or something wrong with this path. But let's do that. So I'm just going to put this up. These are all the changes that I made. I'm going to say added button, right? We'll say it's a UI or a button to a UI objects. That's what we did. And we had to do a global for this and everything else, right? So we're going to say plus this, and we're going to go here and, check mark maybe. How about that? Check mark. And then here and push. All right. It's going to take time to propagate. And then we can try and fix this pathing issue. Great. Guys, we're doing fantastic for time too, because this is way beyond what I would have expected. By the way, to check to see if this is updated, remember, one thing to do is check sources. Whenever you want to check to see if it's updated, go into your scripts online, go into UI objects, and see if you have a button. Notice that there's no button object. Because there's no button object, we know it hasn't been updated because we just made a button object. And that would solve part of the issue. If I refresh again, and if we see a no button again, we can go through here and check to see that there's still no button object. See? No button. And that's what we know. We can also check this inside of our code up here by taking this and again dragging it into something like Firefox, which I recommend using a separate browser for this, for testing, if you're really nervous about stuff. Now we know that either it hasn't propagated, let's install, or the pathing is wrong. These are the things. This is what makes it wrong for us. So let's take a look at that. So again, I'm going to go to inspect element. I'm going to go to console, and you can see still we have an issue. If I want to look at, just going to move this a little higher. If I look at the inspector, right, you can see that I do indeed have button.js in there, right? /scripts/UI buttons. That definitely works, right? So / something might be the way to go, right? // and remember, inside scripts we have to go up one in order for us to get to our class. And remember, the other thing that we're having a problem with is the reason why this is happening is because we're not Centennial College. We are this, right? And we're trying to get something that's giving us a 404, okay? And that's why this is an issue. We can't get bounds on something that doesn't exist, and that's why we're having this problem, because we're having a pathing issue. Now, this is where I like Chrome better than Firefox, because here we're not even getting that 404, right? And even when I open this up, it doesn't matter. We're not getting a 404 here whatsoever. Whereas over here we are, and which is what I want to see. I want to see the error so I can correct it. Again, if I refresh, I want to see a 404 here for preload.min.js, right? It's trying to load this click me button in the wrong spot, okay? So the pathing is clearly wrong. Sources is something I'm missing. And if I go to scripts, now do I have buttons? It's propagated. So now you can see that I have my button and my class is clearly wrong. Let's test it locally and see if I can fix it here before I do this. And some of the ways to do that is in my app.js, remember you can modify things on the fly. Let's try a different path. So let's try / this and save. And let's see if that does it fix my problem, right? So it says source map detected, don't show again. But / doesn't seem to figure things out, and it can't work this way because it has to preload. So let's try it. So again, it's hard to troubleshoot this because locally this might go to the wrong place if I did /. Let's try it remotely. So I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to try and change this pathing. The pathing is the wrong part. That's the thing, right? So here is the pathing, which is going to be /assets, right, as an example. Now let's try. We tried / just slash, and now we're going to try /. Let's see how this works. Now this will be wrong because locally, right, if I refresh, if I was to do this, if this was, one of them is wrong, because otherwise we're going to get an error here, right? In our local, it's going to give us the wrong path. One of them. Okay? Locally, it looks like we're good if I just did this, right? app.ts. So let's put this up on GitHub and see if that fixes it. So we'll say updated pathing again. Trying to fix it so it works on GitHub. That's what we're trying to do. Push. And then we'll check it afterwards. If it's a dot slash, we know if it's updated. If it's not a dot slash, if it's a dot dot or something else, then we know it hasn't updated. Again, if I go up on GitHub and if I refresh, and if this says something else other than dot slash, we know it hasn't updated. That's the way to check it, my friends. All right. I'm not going to belabor the point. Questions around the button. Why I did that? Well, because of your assignment is what the answer is. Because if you think about it, what I said was, in your assignment, and let's take a look at that assignment together now. We're going to work on it today and next day. And hopefully that'll help you get things moving, right? In the assignment, which is that I gave you guys kind of last week, right? Which was here. The assignment basically says that, the assignment basically says the following, right? Let's make it so it's bigger. It says you're going to have 3 images to the UI, 1 for each reel of the slot machine that have a default image spin when the UI initially loads. Preloads. The image in the reels will change every time the user spins the spin button. The images that appear in the image window should be one of the symbols, fruits, example, that match the randomly generated symbols within your code. Okay. We need to find some images now. We need to find some stuff to test with. And these are going to be bitmap images, right? Very similar to buttons, but I want to be able to display stuff. I can already do buttons and labels, no problem. Now we need to fix this images thing. Bitmaps. Okay, that's interesting. So I don't have assets, right? Let's make them or get them. So that's the next step. So I would want to do something that looks like this. So say, okay, I want to get slot machine symbols. All right, let's see if I can find some. So there's some. This looks remarkably like some of the things I need, except I have a cucumber. So this won't really, or not a cucumber. Guys, my mind, I'm thinking cucumber. In my head, I'm translating from Greek karpouzi, which is, of course, not what I want to say. It is a watermelon. I'll be okay. Thank you. Tamano, you're faster than me. All right. So, yeah, I could probably use these images. I need 7 of them because remember, in my original code that I gave you guys in my slot machine, right? So that means, let's take a look at my desktop. I gave you guys this slot machine stuff, and inside of here, if you look at the JS file, which is this one, I'm just going to open up with VS Code for now, just in a separate file, right? So we can look at it. It's not actually not part of our document right now. It's just in a separate file. We're looking at it as an editor. We know that there are grapes, bananas, oranges, cherries, bars, bells, sevens, and blanks. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different fruits that I'm using. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Maybe I can use this. I don't need, this looks like a lime, right? Or it could be a lemon, depending on how you look at it. This is cherries. These are grapes. This is oranges. Don't have bananas. So, not really what I'm looking for. Bars I have, sevens I have, but bells I don't. So, again, let's look and see if there's something else. I could also use these and just change the symbols. Who cares? As long as the ratio is the same, it doesn't really matter, right? But again, you want to do as little work here as required, right? Because again, I'm looking for us to get assets here. So cherries, bars, bells, and sevens. I want to look for cherries, bars, bells, and sevens. So there's bars, there's bells, there's cherries, there's sevens. So I could use some of these. Mixing and matching, I don't recommend. Okay, mixing and matching, the problem with that is You might get different sizes. You're going to have to do a lot of different work. And there's already work that we have to do here because we have to slice this up into different pieces. I'm going to give these to you so that way you don't have to do the work. I will do it for you, right? But we have to find something that's reasonable that's up here. How about this one? So we got cherries, we got bars, we got bells, we got bananas, we got sevens. That's a lot of them. And we don't have grapes. But I could probably use this one as a grape. And do we have oranges? We do. So it's only the grapes that kind of look weird. A grape as opposed to grapes. And we have an extra one. This is everything and then some. Everything we need and then some. Let's use this one. Now, strategies. If I'm going to use this one, what I have to do is I have to slice it because there are 9 symbols, right? So I got to take this and slice it up. And there's some tools that I'm going to use to do it for you, right? One of the tools I'm going to use is something called Texture Packer. Let's see even if I haven't have that installed in my system. I may not. I do not, all right? But, I mean, I can also do this manually, which is probably something I can do. Let's download this first. So download this image, save image as, and we're going to go to our desktop. We're going to go to COMP125 and lesson 12, and we're going to put this raw image inside of assets images, and we're going to call this thing symbols. So one image for all the symbols. I'm going to keep it as a JPEG because that's what it is. All right, and then I'm going to open this thing up inside of any program that you want. For example, maybe I want to open it up with Fireworks. Because I use a very simple program like that. Or if you want to use Photoshop or Paint or whatever you want. It doesn't matter to me. Right? It's truly up to you what you want to use. I'm just going to use Fireworks because I like it. It's very simple and dumb. Right? Like literally. So Adobe, where do I have Fireworks? I don't know. I think it's under x86 if I'm not wrong. So it's probably not a program files, but program files x86. I bet you. Yes. This. Open. Always use that kind of program for a thing. Awesome. Right, there we go. So that's the program that I'm using for this. Watermelon. It's 4:13, and of course I've run out of time, but I want to chop these up. Right? I want to take this image and chop it up. And the way to do that is to estimate how big each one is. So I'm just going to use this, and I'm going to say that the total width here, if I'm measuring it, and again you can see this is about, did I say 600? 600. So 600, and if we divide it by 3, right, then these are 200 each. So if I say this would be 200, then it would be probably right there. Right there, 200 width, right? And if I start from 200, so if I think about 200 as an example, and I go from 200 and I go all the way to, for 200 width, that would be from 200 to, let's say, 400. I don't have to do it, I can actually do it here. So 200, right? And I start off at 200, and you can see that that is what it looks like. I kind of grab that image, right? So that's kind of where it does. I'm not sure that it would divide everything equally. See if I can actually fit this in 200, because that's something that's going to be happening. So it's pretty tight to fit into 200. So it does do that, right? But you can see that these images look like they're evenly spaced. Okay, that's a good thing. Next thing is, let's try the height. The height is also 600, so it's 200 by 200 each. Okay, so now it's a matter of cutting it back. So now if I know it's 200 by 200 each, I can just literally split them up. I just use a cutter tool like this. I can say that the width is 200 and the height is also 200. And then if I press enter and I double click, I have my 7. Okay, and I can say file, save as. Bear with me while I do this for you guys. I'll call this 7.png. I want to make it a PNG for sure, because that would make it so that there's transparencies. All right. Otherwise, I won't. So I want to undo that now and do the same thing with the other ones. Now I'm using a slicing by hand kind of thing that I'm doing, right? That's what I'm doing here, which in effect is not the best thing to do. There's tools out there that'll do the same thing. So my X should be at 200, my Y should be at 0, and my width and my height should be 200. So that should cut the bananas, right? And that is my banana, right? And file, save as banana.png. Undo. And you can see where this is going. I'm not going to cut the carpuzzi, my watermelon, right? That's how you say it in Greek. I do want the bar and the bell. So here's the bar, the bell. I'm going to go to a Y of 200 and a width and a height of 200, right? Enter it, double click, and there's my bar, my bell, file, save as, and we're going to say bell.png. Okay, they're pretty big, these things, but it's okay. We can always resize them afterwards. First, we have to get them. Undo, and let's try the next one. Now, this one looks pretty big, so let's see if we can kind of get in there. So it's 200 by 200. It's 200 on the x-axis and 200 on the y-axis, and that's it. Double click, bar, file, save as, bar.png. Again, you can do your own, guys, if you want to be creative. It's totally fine with me. Don't need the lemon, but we do need the orange and these last ones. So again, I'll do one of these where this is 200 and 200. The Y will be 400, and double click. You can see that that's not evenly spaced, but who cares? And I'll go file, save as, and we'll make that orange.png. And the same thing goes for the last ones, as you can see. All right, so any questions before we move on? I'm just giving you these. I'm going to give these up online for you, so you have them, right? So that way you're not searching around. If you don't want to, you can use mine. I'm totally fine with that. File, save as. We'll say grape.png. It's only one grape. Sure, undo, and we'll do the last one, and then we're done. It didn't take that long. It was tedious, but you know, whatever. 200, 200, and there's some slicing tools you can use. I just don't have them on my menu system, and I'm not going to get them. It'll probably take longer to get them than just to do it. All right, and file, save as, cherries. Okay, done. So I've got all the symbols I need, right? I don't need these two. These are the extras. I only need 7. And I can save all this and get away with it. And now that I've got those, I can probably close this down. I don't need this anymore. So, and here they are. Banana, bar, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's put this up on GitHub. We'll use these as symbols that we're going to update next week, or next day, I mean. So I'm going to add them to GitHub, and I'll say added slot machine assets. Okay, we'll say symbols, symbol assets, because we also need some kind of background. All right, so we'll add them in and push them up. So you guys should have that now. If you download my project, you'll have the assets I just sliced for you and everything else. There's no need for you to, you know, do things on your own if you don't have to. So that's all that I want to do today. I could keep going, but we're going to go way out of bounds in terms of stuff. Does anyone have any burning questions about what we did today? And again, just to check to see if this works now, we can refresh. And hey, the button, that was the trick, wasn't it? The button should have been /, right? And if I go click me, you can see online now, it works, and it's using my classes. So this is good. This is the trick. Okay, guys, that's it for today. Thank you so much. I'll see some of you in 10 minutes, or in a minute, and I'll see some of you on Wednesday. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the stream now, and we'll talk soon.